Welcome to this Microsoft Teams for Education webinar. My name is Dominic Williamson and I'm part of the Teams for Education product group. Today we're hosting a session on online lectures and classes with all of your students. So this is very much focused on how can you then use Teams as a virtual learning space to bring everyone together using online Teams meetings, and also having a persistent place where we can come together for conversations, file collaboration, and also managing assignments and apps and more in a singular space with all of your students, whether that's in a classroom or all the way into a lecture theater itself. Microsoft Teams allows you to meet online with students and then also have a virtual space to continue the learning. In the webinar today, we'll be covering three key areas. If you're brand new to Teams, you're in the right place. We'll be doing an overview of using Teams and creating your first class. Then the approach to running an effective online meeting. So this is an online class, online lecture where all of your students are coming together. And then we'll be finishing with resources to help you get started today. Now, if you're in the group of people who say, actually, I don't want to create a class, I just need an ad hoc online meeting space with my students, and it's a one-off, so you're not going to have, say, weekly content or regular back and forth, you can very quickly and easily create a Teams meeting ad hoc, and we have a separate event for that. If you visit aka.ms/Teams edu webinars, where we go through what it looks like to create a one-off Teams meeting. The goal of this webinar is how do we create a persistent online class space with all of our students that also allows us to do online meetings with all students very quickly and very easily. For those new to Microsoft Teams, it is the hub for teamwork, bringing everything together into a single shared workspace where people can chat, call, work on files, collaborate within apps, and hold effective online meetings. Teams delivers a unique end-to-end meeting experience that brings back that human element of face-to-face interaction, while helping everyone stay focused before, during, and after the meeting itself. Teams is also available globally, meaning that you can collaborate with students not just in the same city as you, but between different countries around the world. And that's where I just want to show you quickly where you can see the international availability of Teams and Microsoft Online Services. So let me switch from the slides really quickly. Here you can find the international availability of Microsoft Online Services, and you can see there are only a few countries where Teams is not currently available. For everywhere else, this is where we can create an online learning experience using online Teams meetings and bring together students from around the world, whether they're in Australia, China, Germany, or let's say the United States, all into a single online learning classroom and online Teams meeting. And we also, of course, then have the ability to make sure this is an inclusive experience where our students are then also able to then use Teams and the Office services in their own language as well. So I want to share an example of then what does it look like, the end result of what we're going to be covering today. And that is this here. I'm going to open up Teams and you can see online class lecture week 1. This is now a class team has been created and all students have been invited to an online Teams meeting, meaning we can all come together in real time. I can present to my students, we can have conversations, share screens, collaborate via video. And what you'll see here is that I've been able to easily invite all of the students in my entrepreneurship course to this online Teams meeting. So only those students will have access to this. You can see quite simply, all it is an online meeting join link. And when this link is clicked, those students can come together into that online space, whether again, they're across the same city or even from around the world. For those who are looking to then just do an ad hoc one-off meeting, this is where I'd recommend you go and attend the other course that we have, which is the aka.ms/Teams edu webinars, where we'll be talking about creating one-off meetings, as well as also doing meetings to invite people external to your organization. But in this one, we're going to be focused very much around how do we create an online class and have students come and join together for online lessons themselves. So I'm going to head back to the slides. The webinar today will be focused on what's possible with the free capabilities of Microsoft Teams for Education, and this is included as part of the Office 365 A1 licensing for education. This means right now, every single student and every single educator and staff member is entitled to be able to create online meetings where up to 250 people can attend. On top of that, you can also do cloud recording at no additional cost, meaning you can make that learning material that you covered available on demand for your students to be able to review as many times as they need to be able to go through those concepts that you had shared as part of your online classes and lectures. For those who require dial-in voice conferencing, or again, the ability to have much larger online meetings with up to 10,000 attendees, this is where we have discounted add-on capabilities as part of the paid licenses for Microsoft Office 365, but we'll be focusing for the intent of this webinar on what's included as part of the free capabilities itself. So what this means is every single educator, staff, and student is entitled to be able to host their own online meeting. So whether that's you inviting your students to be able to then attend your class or your lecture, or also empowering students to be able to host virtual study groups and online meetups. Everyone, as part of Office 365 A1 licenses, is entitled to Teams, which includes the 250 attendees for online meetings. I just want to quickly share the website where you can get more information about what's included, and if you're not already using Office 365, where you can get started. To get started, search for Office 365 Education, and if you aren't already using it, simply type in your school email address to get started here. But what I'll be focused on is you'll see the capabilities that are included as part of the Office 365 A1. So this gives you then the free online versions of Office, which is everything that you need, including then Microsoft Teams. And if you're interested in then as part of the other offerings, all the information that you need is here, or consult your Microsoft Education licensing partner. But heading back over to the slides. The Teams app is available across platforms, making sure you have a consistent online experience for collaborating, communicating, and of course, meeting together online. So whether you're on a desktop, a Windows device, a Linux, or an Apple Mac device, again, we have desktop clients available. If you're on mobile devices such as iPads and Android tablets, the Teams app is available. And of course, smartphones, which is so important as we see a lot of students preferring to then engage with their smartphones as part of their courses and their learning experience. Again, we have support for iPhone and Android. Finally, you can also use Teams in the web browser. So if you're using Edge, Chrome, Safari, and others, you can immediately load the Teams app today. To get the free app for your device, simply head to aka.ms/getteams to download the application itself, or if you are using a device with an app store, so your iPhone, just go straight to the App Store and search Microsoft Teams. The focus of today will be very much going hands-on to help you set up your class team and online classes. And so this is really, we're going to follow the methodology around how do we have an effective online meeting. And that really has three key parts: before your lecture or your class, during, how do you deliver your teaching, and after, how do you continue conversations and also make on-demand revision of the content you covered available to your students. What we'll be looking at, if we add a little bit more detail to that, is before the class, setting up the class itself, scheduling your lecture or online class, preparing your device to do the online meeting. Then during, how do you present content to the attendees, your students? How do you manage things like conversations, polls, and getting feedback from students? And also then making sure that you record that and make it available on demand later for your students. And then lastly, what happens after the meeting? How do you provide access to the recording and also the powerful things that are available through Microsoft Stream, where it does automatic captions, allowing students to be able to then also be able to search the transcript for key topics that you had covered during your lesson itself. How do you also then do things like looking at the responses to polls and conversations that were had during that online class, and making sure then that you can continue to collaborate in context of the documents and the conversations that were happening within your learning materials itself. So where we're going to start is with the before. How do you get set up before you have your first online class? And there's going to be three key parts that we'll cover: setting up your virtual space, scheduling your lecture, and then preparing your meeting device. The first step will be to create your virtual class space. And a Microsoft team can support up to 5,000 members. And we have different templates designed specifically for education, meaning that when you create a class team, it has unique capabilities such that students cannot leave the class team itself. It is an invite-only team, and it is also hidden from the global address list. And it has then sections such as a class materials folder that by default your students cannot edit and only you can edit. One thing to be considerate of is whilst you can have up to 5,000 people in a team, some of the class assignment services and the OneNote class notebook currently support 200 students. This will increase in the future, but something to be aware of today. So if you are in a scenario where you're doing large-scale teaching, what we would suggest is create one large team for all of the course members, and then use a separate team per tutorial group or breakouts group to be able to then manage the assignments and class notebook. So you still have that one large learning community, for example, to bring everyone together, and then you have then the smaller groups to be able to use and take advantage of the assignment service and the OneNote class notebook if you so choose to. Now, when it comes to adding students to your class, I'm going to take you through how we create the class team, and there are a few different options depending on where you are and how quickly you need to get started. So you have a few options to self-manage and self-create the class team. So this involves the ability where you can then provide an invite link. So that's quite simply a link that you share with your students, and when they click it, they are invited to join the class team itself. You can provide students a join code, which is then a 6-character code. When they type in that code, again, they are automatically added into your class. If you have an existing email distribution group, you can use that to be able to add in students to the class. One thing to be aware of though, the distribution group is a one-time add. So if you do change members of the distribution group later on, they will not automatically change membership of the team itself. But one thing we would recommend longer term is that you do work with IT to set up a class team, because IT then have the capabilities to automate membership. So this is where there are capabilities in Microsoft Teams where you can automatically create a team, you can automatically then add students, and you can also automatically make sure that that student membership is kept in sync. So we have free services like School Data Sync to achieve this, as well as also scripting capabilities using PowerShell and the Microsoft Graph. So this is where we would recommend working with your IT department to be able to help with that large-scale automation and setup. But absolutely, there are ways for you right now today where you can then also invite your students through a few different methods that I'll cover in just a moment. So let's get started. And if you're brand new to Microsoft Teams and Office 365, the place that I would suggest is, again, go back to the Office 365 education site and put in your email address to begin. For those who already have access to Office 365, to get access to Microsoft Teams and load it up, all you need to do is go to office.com. If you don't see the Teams tile here, you need to make sure you reach out to your IT department to make sure they enable you for Teams. But this is where you can then easily access Microsoft Teams and all of the other online apps available to you as part of Office 365 for Education, like your email, Stream, Forms, and much more. Clicking on Teams takes us over to the Teams web app. So I've just already loaded it up previously, and you can see here I can then use Teams in the web browser. But one thing I would always recommend as a best practice on your device that you use regularly, make sure you install the Teams desktop app. And you'll see here, just by clicking on that bottom left-hand side, we can download the free desktop app and then get started from our device. For those that are new to using Teams, you'll see here right now I'm on the Teams tab, and this gives me then access to the different teams that I'm a member of. One of the powerful things about Microsoft Teams is this gives me a single place to bring together communication and collaboration, whether that's between staff members, whether if I'm involved in a research project, or if I'm teaching. I now have a single app that can bring together all of these different scenarios into one hub for any of the communication and collaboration required for all of these different ways that I can work together with my students and my colleagues. On the left-hand side, you'll see then we can also go through and do things like private chat and have private chat breakout spaces. I can then also see a summary of my activity feed. We have then the assignment service, the calendar, which will be very important, and I'll come back to later, the ability to make calls without needing to give away your personal mobile phone number, manage your files, as well as also visit the App Store for the hundreds of apps that are available to bring in integrations with both educational apps, developer tools, project management tools, and much more. So very, very powerful. And you can see here, if I click on the Education tab, we also then have plagiarism checkers that can be built in, Flipgrid, many, many more educational enhancements. Now, if it's your first time creating a class team, I'll show you an example of my entrepreneurship course. You can see here, we always then have a space for our conversations, the files, and then also some of the class tools like the class notebook, assignments, grades, course syllabus, and more. Now, it is optional whether you want to use the assignment service here, or if you have an existing LMS, it is possible that you can then just choose to not use that and then of course continue to use your existing LMS service, but the Teams assignments and grades are very powerful if you choose to use them. What we have here is I have then a channel per week of content, and you can see when I click on the channel, each channel has its own conversation space, its own space for files and integrations. So you can see here previous posts that have been made, as well as also conversations in the context of those post messages. Now, you might be saying, well, hang on a second, how did you actually create this in the first place? So let me take you through creating a brand new class team. To do that, simply go back over to the Teams tab, and you'll see in the top corner here, join or create a team. Clicking on that takes me to the ability to create a team, and you'll see here, join a team with a code. So this is where your students would come to join a team if you want to invite your students via a code, and I'll show you how to create the code in a few moments. Clicking on create team then gives me my options: class, professional learning community, staff, and other. What you'll see here are these are the different templates. Of course, today we'll be focused on the class team. This is where it has things like the assignment service. But if you're working together with your colleagues, particularly if you're managing a department remotely, this is where you can create also a staff team or a professional learning community. Fundamentally, these are all still Microsoft Teams with the same capabilities for online meetings, for collaborating together. But what changes are some of the capabilities, like for example, you have, instead of a class notebook, you have a staff notebook in the staff team. What we would recommend is the other team type, unless you are a department leader or you're teaching a class. If you're running a research project, if you're running internal admin, if you're working together with students outside of a class, the other team type is the best for all other situations. It has the least templating, and by default, a student can only create another team type. Students cannot create staff, PLC, or class teams. To get started, all we need to do is create a name. I'm going to call this B103 Business Studies. But this could be whatever class or course name that you have. And you can see here we could also then give it a description and reuse an existing team as a template. So great if you want to carry over structure from previous teaching semesters. When I go and click Next, then the team is created. If you do not see the Create a Team button, that means IT has disabled it for you, and you will need to contact them to enable that Create Team button or for them to create the classes for you. Now you'll see here I can then add teachers or students. So I'm going to focus on adding students. The teacher part would add fellow teachers as an owner of the team, just so if you are in a co-teaching scenario. But for right now, I'm going to focus on my students. So let's say Adele, and I'm going to add in, let's say, another student, Terry. Now, the beautiful thing about this is if you know your students' names or emails, you can bring them in and quickly paste them in here. You can also use a distribution list. And again, remember that IT can also manually add, I should say automatically add in those for you. So you don't have to manually do this if IT automate this service. I'm going to click Add. As a rule of thumb, it is best to add in as many of the students as you can as early on, but I'm going to show you now how you can also have it so your students then receive a code or a link to be able to join the class team. Just like that, my team is now created. And you'll notice this looks different to the entrepreneurship course. There's no channels on the side, and right now we have the base template, which is the class notebook, assignments, and grades. You'll notice there's no course syllabus because that was one of the Word documents I had pinned at the top. So we'll be creating the channels and customizing our learning space shortly. But let's focus on now adding in a few more students. So the first option is to get a link to the team. Simply click on the three-dot ellipses for more options and click Get Link to Team. You can see here I'll click Copy. And what I'm going to do is you could send that link out however you choose. If you have an existing message board, a conversation forum, I'm just going to use an email really quickly and send that out to my students. Again, you could have an existing list of students here. I'm just going to take one student, for example, add in the link and click Send. Just like that, you'll see here if I switch over to the students view, the student, I'm going to log in right now as Douglas, and we can see the email from Ken, who is one of the other demo users that I was just sharing. And when Douglas clicks on this, he'll be directed to Teams. I'm just going to use the web app because right now I'm already logged in as Ken in the desktop client. And you'll see here that Teams loads up, and very quickly and easily then I can request to join. One of the great things about the request link is you'll see you have the ability to then approve. So this makes sure that if students are forwarding links, only the students who you actually are in your class, you approve them to actually be added to the class itself. To do that, if I head over to the team here, click again on Manage Team, and you'll see here Pending Requests. And so this is where I can see all of the students before I accept them into the class itself. And just like that, if I head back over to Members, you'll see now that Douglas is one of the students in my class. Our other option to add in students quickly and easily at scale is also then using the Join a Code. So if I click again on the triple dots, the ellipsis to go to Manage Team, you'll see here from Settings. This is where we can change settings of the team. A quick tip, I would always recommend update the team theme just to give it a bit more visual style and help your students find it. You can see we can filter by different from secondary, post-secondary, and primary, or we can just search through, upload our own image for the course, or I'm just going to take this one because it's a business course. And just like that, gave it a little bit more style. But heading back over then to those settings, you'll see here the team code. And this allows me to then add my students in via a code. When I click on Generate, this code I could then show full screen if we were in person together, say in front of a lecture theater or in a classroom. But if you're doing this remotely, this is where we can just copy that code itself. And I'm now going to be able to distribute that to my students. So just like sending out a link before, wherever you want to put this code, do be mindful of who will have access to this, because unlike the join via a link, anyone who types in this code will be instantly added to the team. So just something to be aware of. What does that look like from the student's point of view? As a student, I go up to the Join or Create a Team, and this is where you can see Join a Team with a code. Pasting in that code, again, however you've distributed that to your students, I can click Join, and instantly that student is brought straight into the team. So something to be aware of how you want your students to join. The code is faster and more seamless, and you do not get to approve it, but at the same time, you might prefer to send out the link and be able to approve each student. Completely your choice, but both are very effective. Heading back now to my class general channel, this is now where I can see as those students are added, each student and their name. Now that we've created our virtual class space, let's go back to the steps to now get ready for our online meeting. Back over in the slides, you can see here the next step is to schedule the online class or lecture, and then make sure our device is prepared. So going back over into Teams, one of the first things before our online meeting with students is I have some resources I want them to review before the online lesson. That's where I'm going to go to the Files tab, and you will see here from Files, we actually have then a class materials folder. Anything you put in that folder, students cannot edit. If you create other files outside of the folder, then they can collaborate and work together on those documents. Now I'm going to head over to class materials, and you'll see here by default it's empty, and it lets you know again that the read-only for students and yourself can then edit those files. I of course could create a brand new file here, and I can also upload existing files. So even if you have images, PDF documents, you can put them in here to distribute them to your students. I actually have an existing file in my OneDrive. So I'm going to go and click on Files on the left-hand side. Click on my OneDrive, which is my personal place as part of my organization to be able to store my files securely. And I'm going to copy over the Topic 1, Entrepreneurship. So I simply go and click Copy, and I want to distribute that to one of the teams that I'm in, which is my B103 Business Studies, to the general channel. And I'm going to put that into the class materials. And just like that, what that will do is copy it over to the team. You can see there one file has been copied. If I head on back to Teams, back to my class materials, and there it is. Now the slides available for my online lesson that my students can review beforehand. As a best practice, you should create a channel for each week or each topic that you have as a core part of the lesson and course that you're going to be teaching. You can see here right now we only have a general channel. What I'm going to do is add in a few more channels, and this will also help to then structure where we have our online meetings. You can see here I'm going to go over to add a channel. I'm going to call this Week 1 Entrepreneurship. You can see I have the ability to give it a description. One thing I would recommend for anything that you want all students to see, if you click automatically show this channel, it will pin it so it's available on the left-hand side. The times when you might not want to have everyone see it is if it's maybe a secondary channel where it's maybe just an interest topic rather than a core topic to your course. And something to be aware of, you can also make private channels. So this is good for students working in groups, or if you want to have a private channel with a teaching colleague in the context of your team. But because we want all students to be part of the content for week 1, I'm going to leave it like this and click add. You can see, just like that, we now have week 1, entrepreneurship, and I'll add another channel just for another quick example. We'll call this one week 2, market trends. And again, just like that, I'm going to add that in. So we now have another week. And what you will see here is each channel has its own conversation space where you can post a message. It has its own file space. So you'll see when I click on files, I cannot now see the class materials because the class materials is in the general channel. So this is really great if you want to have then different sort of files in different channels and structure it. The class materials is by default always in, of course, the general channel. Now we've started to give our class a bit of structure. Time to schedule the online lesson. For the online lesson, we're actually going to schedule that in a team that I've pre-created with a bit more back and forth with existing students. So let me show you what that looks like. So going to the B102 Business Studies, you'll see here we have now an existing team. And to do a quick recap, so to get to this point, you've now created a class team, your students are all added, and as we can see here, we're already starting to have a conversation back and forth in the message space. We want to now arrange our first week online lesson. To do that, you can see here, we have now a channel for week 1 entrepreneurship, but again, you can give this whatever name you choose, but it is helpful to base it around weeks or key topics in your course. Go to the calendar to schedule the online meeting. Here you will see all of my existing then meetings, whether they are from Outlook as in-person meetings or also for Teams meetings. Because Microsoft Teams being part of Office 365, it's one calendar that all works together as part of Exchange Online. Because we have a class already created, arranging our online meeting is really straightforward. To do so, I simply pick the date and time I would like the online meeting to occur with my students. You can see from the top here, I can pick any date in the calendar. I just simply choose when that is. For right now though, I have my week 1, which will be at 10 a.m. on Friday. To select the time, I simply go over and click on it. You'll see here, this opens up the meeting invite. What I simply do is give it a title. So we're going to call this one week 1. Entrepreneurship. The location, if we did have a lecture theatre, we could also put in the location, or if you have a classroom. But because this is an online Teams meeting, I'm going to leave it blank. And I'm also then going to add in here the additional bit of context for my students. So this is where I'll just say, hi students, for week 1, we'll be meeting online for the content I'll be teaching you. Where it's really powerful because we already have the class. To be able to invite my students, I don't have to type in all of their names. I simply say, I want to meet in the context of the course itself. You can see here, there is my business studies, and then there are the different channels. So we're going to have our week 1 online meeting in the context of the week 1 channel. You can see here, this is a Microsoft Teams online meeting. Everyone can join online. What's powerful about this though is only the students in this course will be invited to this. So what this means is all of the students will receive a calendar invite, but it's now localized to the scope of the course itself. Simply click on schedule. And you will see what this has done is that we now have in the week 1 entrepreneurship, the online meeting has now been posted here. So all of my students can see that we'll be meeting on Friday at 10 a.m. As well as also if I go back to the calendar, I can now also see that it is in the calendar. So this will also appear in your Outlook calendar because they are one and the same. So even if you're using the Outlook desktop client, you have the ability to see it here. If you make a typo, you can always go back and click on edit. For example, actually this is a 1-hour online class, so I'm just going to amend that and click update. There we go. One other piece of advice, depending on the way that you want to run your class or your online lecture, when I go back to my week 1 meeting, I can click on Meeting Options. What this allows is for me to define who will be able to present. Now, if I leave this as everyone, this does mean that students can also present their content. So if you are looking to present and have a back and forth with students, this can be ideal. If you're looking to do, say, a lecture and only you want to be presenting, you don't want students to interrupt the recording, you don't want them to be able to present their desktops and ensure that you have the full control over the online meeting, this is where I would suggest that you have maybe only specific people if you have, say, a teaching assistant, or just yourself. When I click Save, this will now mean only myself as the person who has arranged the meeting will be able to then present and manage the recording. Heading back over into the class now. One thing that's also a great practice, again before we now run our online class, is to make sure that we share resources with students, particularly if you want to make sure that they review them before the online meeting. To do that, I simply go over to the main conversation space and I can then format this. When I click on that A for format, it gives me additional options. And what I'll be able to do here is then go through and type out a message for my students. Let's give this a title or subject. I'll say review materials before class. And one of the key things to keep in mind with Microsoft Teams when you are in a channel is to make sure you use @mentions. What @mentions do is it will notify then either individual students, groups of students, or everyone in your class. I want all of my students to receive this, and this will then send a pop-up notification on their device, whether it's their phone, their laptop, their tablet, and I'm going to mention everyone in the team. So just by typing @team, it automatically knows the team that I'm in. And I'm just going to paste in the message here, students, please review the week 1 slides before our class on Friday. Now, I could, of course, then have to try and tell students where those materials are, but because I previously have uploaded it, I can quite simply then reference them by clicking on the attach. I could upload a material right here, but I don't want students to make edits to the slides. So that's why I uploaded those previously to the channel in general. And in general, we have that class materials folder where students cannot make edits. So only myself can make the edits to these slides, and my students will have a view of read only. By clicking share, what this means is my students will be able to see the slides but not edit the slides, and great for them to come prepared to the online class itself. By clicking send, that will now send out a push notification to all of my students. The last step before we host our online class is to make sure our device is ready. The number one reason for people saying, "Can you hear me? I can't hear you," is because they often haven't selected the right microphone or the right speaker on their device. And we have a really easy way that we can just double check and make sure everything is ready. If I go up and click on my profile, and you'll see here right now, Ken is the example user that I've logged in as, and click on settings. From devices, this is where I can go through and double check the devices. So make sure you have the right speaker, the right microphone selected, particularly if you are plugged in to, say, multiple monitors. And if I scroll down, I can also double check that I have the camera correctly selected. Again, you'll want to do this to make sure it's an inclusive meeting. The most important part here is to make sure you click on that make a test call. What this does is it allows you to then do an online call, which you can hear what their attendees will hear. So it's the perfect way to make sure that your speakers and microphone are ready to go before your online class. Heading back to the slides for a moment. A key thing to keep in mind is the type of device that you use, because the experience for everyone involved will depend on the quality of the microphone and the camera. So a laptop is a great one-on-one device, but it's not well suited, for example, being in a large room if you're in a working space where you want to have multiple people all being heard. Or for example, if you're in a lecture theater or a large classroom, again, putting a laptop at the end of a table is not going to be a good experience for those dialing in. So be considerate of those who are attending and make sure you have a device that is appropriate for the type of room that you are in. And if you go to office.com/Teams devices, we have then Teams meeting devices that are designed to then make sure everyone in the room will be heard. If it's in a classroom space where you want to make sure everyone is being able to be heard, or if you're in a lecture theater to make sure that you have a camera system that will see you and the content that you are presenting. Now that we've set up the class itself and we have our online class meeting scheduled, what do we do during the actual lesson? This is where we're going to go through 3 parts: present content to attendees, record the session for later viewing, and then managing conversations and questions. One thing to keep in mind is, as part of Microsoft Teams online meetings, up to 250 people can attend with their video on, but it's the most recent speakers whose videos will appear then in the view space. Now, because I'm doing a webinar demo today, you'll see that we don't have the video on because I'll be playing the roles of a few different people. But what Teams then does is it allows you to then have everyone with live video feeds, and just like in person, when someone pauses speaking, normally you would look at the next person who has then started talking. And that's exactly what happens within Teams, where you will see then the most recent speaker comes into the view if they're not already there. So here's an example of what that looks like. Let's head back into Teams to start our online meeting. From the calendar, you'll see there is the Monday morning online class that we have. So I'm just going to go and click on that. And I can see which of my students have accepted. Again, a great skill for them to develop as part of when they move into the workplace. And I'll just click Join to begin. This is where I can double check to make sure my camera is correctly selected. If I want to blur the background, should I be in a shared workspace? And also to double check the audio, speaker, and also the microphone itself. Clicking Join Now, I can then also see and add my students in. For the purposes of this demo, normally they of course will join on their own when they're ready. And what we can see here is the students have now come in and joined. If I click on Show Participants, the students have now joined, and I can see again which students are currently in my class that are in the online class right now and which are not. If a student did join and wasn't on mute, I can always click Mute All if they're being disruptive and maybe got some background noise. And a great way to let all of the students know is I would always recommend head over to the conversation space, and you'll see here that I can go through and I'll do @team this week's online class has started. And what that'll do is send a push notification to everyone to let them know that the class has begun. In addition to, of course, they would receive a reminder from their calendar, but I like to do this as well just so they get that extra pop-up on their phone. Going through, I can now see the students who have currently joined. Remember, if this was normal, you would encourage them all to turn their video on, but because for the purposes of the webinar today, I'll be playing a few different roles. The first thing I want to do is, like any good good online session, is make sure I start the recording. So to do that, I simply click on the 3-dot ellipses here, and you'll see the different options I have. Some very powerful ones like live captions, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. When I click Start Recording, this will then record everything that is said, all of the screen share, and all of the interactions from a voice, video, and what's being shared on my screen back and forth throughout this class or throughout this lecture. To begin, I'm going to now click Start Recording. You'll see what happens is it will then pop up with a red recording dot. Ken has started the recording, you are recording, and everyone will receive a notification that recording has begun. Let's get into the content itself for this session. I can then click Share. Now that Share button is incredibly powerful because it lets me share my screen, a set of slides, or even a collaborative whiteboard. Now you'll see here on the left-hand side, we have the ability to include system audio. So if you wanted to share something, a music clip or something that was on your device, you can then also include your system audio. If you want to then work together with your students and show them something that is not on a slide deck, for example, this is where sharing your screen will show anything on your desktop screen. So this is great if you wanted to take your students through using a program like, let's say, Adobe Photoshop, where you don't really want to have slides that you're talking to, you literally want to take them through the application itself. Anything on your desktop, your students will now see. And sharing desktop is the best approach in a low bandwidth environment. You'll see here I can then also share a specific window. So let's say I don't want my students to potentially see my emails pop up. If I just share the window itself of the application I have open, so for example OneNote, or again just a slide deck, then only that window will be visible by my students, and a great way to make sure your content stays private if you did have other windows open on your desktop. And the last option I have is the ability to share then directly PowerPoint slides. And when I click on a PowerPoint slide, what this will do is allows my students to also be able to move through the slides without changing the slide that I'm currently presenting to others. As a rule of thumb, you definitely want to focus on particularly sharing a window or your desktop, because these are great because it ensures whatever you're sharing, your students will see. And the PowerPoint slides are powerful if you want students to be able to move through the slides for their own reference while you're presenting to them. Clicking on the slides like this, you'll see here it says opening topic 1, entrepreneurship. And now we can start to go through the content for today. This is where now you would just be talking to these slides, or if you're sharing your desktop, any application that you have open on your desktop, and we can start have a conversation with the students. Of course, if you invite your students to come off mute, you can then have an audio conversation with them. In this context though, I'm going to use this conversation space and ask a question for my students to respond to. So we're going to go here, what do you think are good qualities of an entrepreneur? And I'm going to encourage my students to respond to that. So give me 2 seconds while that happens. So jumping back over, you'll see here that if I go and click on send from the different students on that right-hand side, we can see those posts come through. If you don't want to receive pop-ups, this is where I can just go through and say do not disturb in that top right-hand corner, and I won't receive any pop-ups while I'm in the middle of a lecture or an online meeting with my students. Now we can see here the responses from the different students, Terry, Marsha, Adele. These are all great qualities that they believe an entrepreneur should have, so I'll give them some positive feedback. And we can continue to have the conversation back and forth as I have then the slides open. Now this is then the point of view from myself as the person who is hosting the online lecture. But you might be wondering, what does this then look like from the perspective of a student? Let me take you through what that looks like. Logged in as the student, Douglas is the example here. I can then see the calendar event if I was to click on calendar. I can see the activity feed, and this is where I can see Ken, the educator. As soon as I've clicked on that, it takes me straight to the in-progress online meeting. And this is where it's taking me straight to then from the point of view here, my week 1 entrepreneurship. I see the icon that a meeting is in progress, and I can click join to join in with my fellow students. Clicking join, you can see that Teams has then intelligently identified multiple people are already in the meeting. So it's by default switched off my microphone. And I can click join, bringing me into the meeting itself. This is where I then get a notification that the recording has started. And also, if you remember back to before, this is where we then set all of the students will be attendees and not presenters, meaning that as a student, I'm not going to be able to share my desktop, and also I cannot stop the recording or change the recording. Very, very useful from the perspective of managing then large online meetings with lots of students, particularly in large classes or lectures. Now, what does that look like then from the perspective of a mobile device? From the view on the mobile device, as a student, I can then still see the teams I'm a part of. You can see here the entrepreneurship course has the online meeting in progress. Of course, the calendar makes it simple for me to be able to just from a one-tap join that Friday session. I can turn on video, I can turn on my microphone. For the purposes of right now, I'll leave it off because of the demo. And you'll see here what'll appear is then the slides that we're seeing just like before when I was on my desktop. And I can also go through and turn on live captions. This will then give me the ability to see in real time what is being said, and it is a very helpful and powerful tool to create a more inclusive online meeting. To finish, press the red hang up. Heading back over into Teams, when I'm finished with the lecture itself, this is where I can then stop presenting. And from there, click and stop recording. What this will then do, it'll mean that once the recording is stopped, no more of the conversation will be recorded. Of course, it gives me a good reminder. And at that point, I can invite my students to finish up and start leaving the lecture itself. And then you'll see here, when I'm ready to finish up, I simply click hang up also. Now, what will happen is once everyone has left the online meeting itself, you will then see progressively the students leaving. And furthermore, one of the things that you can do, if you do need to, you can always still double check who was in the online meeting as it stands. You do have the ability, if any reason that you do need to, that you can always go back and also remove a student if required. So this is where I can then go remove participant, or also make them attendee, make them a presenter if I do need them to present something, even though I've set originally that students cannot. Now that the online meeting has concluded, you'll see that the meeting has stopped and it is now saving the recording to Microsoft Stream. For those that haven't used Microsoft Stream before, let me head over and continue a bit of a conversation around that. Let's head to the slides to finish off the talk about Stream and what happens now that our online meeting has finished. Now we're at the after phase of our online meeting. We've now had our online class with our students, and now it's about making sure that they can access the meeting recording, viewing responses to conversations, and continuing to chat and collaborate on documents and learning materials in the context of our class team itself. When you record a meeting in Microsoft Teams, it automatically uploads to a service called Microsoft Stream, part of Office 365. This is a very powerful service because it's a video platform service unique to your organization. You own all the content that gets stored there, and it means it's automatically made available to your students when we've recorded it in the context of our class team. And using artificial intelligence, it also can do things like generate closed captions, and that closed captions can also become searchable, really helping students as part of revision. If you've never used Stream before, it's free for education, allows you to store up to 500,000 videos in total per organization, and the ability to then have each of those videos be up to 50 gigabytes. So for your tenant, you can have 500,000 videos and up to 50 gigabytes per video. For more information, search Microsoft Stream limits, and that will then take you to more details about Stream itself. Let's head on over to Teams to have a bit of a look at what that Stream recording looks like. If we head back to the channel, we can see now the concluded online meeting that we had, the replies from the different students in context of the original question that I asked, as well as now the recorded meeting is available on demand. Now, that can take up to 3 times the duration of the original recording for it to appear here, while it takes a little bit of time for it to be processed. To click on the recording itself, I can then view what was recorded throughout, and you'll see I have the ability to click on closed captions, and it will then pop up with closed captions. I can also search those captions for the phrase when I was referring to giving the students positive feedback, and then it can allow me to jump straight to that point in time where that phrase was said. Now, this is incredibly powerful as we think about helping our students with on-demand learning. The ability where they can then jump to a point in your online meeting where you might have been discussing a key topic. Let's say it's economics, where they can jump to the key concept of microeconomics rather than having to click through randomly a 30-minute or a 2-hour online meeting. They can jump straight to that moment where you were discussing the topic and really focus on the revision rather than trying to remember exactly where in the time it was actually said. Very powerful and very, very helpful. If I need to, I can always click on that 3-dot ellipsis and open in Microsoft Stream. Microsoft Stream is then, of course, an online service, as I mentioned, as part of Office 365. So you'll see here in the top left-hand side, when I click on the app launcher, I can also then access all the other parts of Office 365, and I can see the transcript as well. So if I need to make any changes, I can simply edit it, particularly if you maybe had a unique name that came up in the recording. But this is where that artificial intelligence gets better and better over time, and it's a very powerful tool to help students, particularly when it comes to revision and making a more inclusive learning environment by having closed captions. The last thing I would recommend is the ability now to click on that 3-dot ellipsis one more time, and where it says make this a tab. A tab is an app which will be pinned in the top row across here. In each channel, you can add tabs, and those tabs are basically different apps that allow you to then have all sorts of different experiences for your students. In this example, we want that stream video to be pinned. So over time, even if lots of other conversations occur, students can always easily find this recording. By clicking on Make This a Tab, it'll automatically then pin that video to the top, meaning my students and anyone else in this class can review this content as much as they need on demand. I can also rename the tab if we want to go and click rename, and we can call this one Week 1 Recording. And now my students will always be able to see this pinned permanently across the top of the channel itself. So from the post section, this is where you will then see the ability to see their recording, as well as also other things like files and so on. Very, very helpful and very useful for our students. You saw before we have now an opportunity where we can continue conversations, but what about collaborating? Because putting files in the class materials folder means students cannot edit them. But what if we do want to have an experience where we're all collaborating together after our online meeting has finished? Well, from the file section here, I don't currently have any files. I could create a new one or upload an existing. So that's exactly what I'm going to do from my OneDrive files themselves. Because I have a group task I want my students to complete online together virtually. I'm going to copy this over to the team itself. Give that just a few seconds. And what that will do is then appear in the file section of the team. And there it is. What's particularly powerful about this is it means my students can then also work together with me in real time. And notice I don't have to send out a share link. Because we're part of the class team, all of the students have access to be able to then work together collaboratively on documents, while also making it streamlined so we don't need to think about behind the scenes, because the class team is automatically managing permissions because my students are already in the class. What's great is I can see in real time as my students are working, so we can see here Marsha and Terry are currently working together on this slide, and so because they're part of Group A, they're coming up with some ideas. And that's fantastic to see that they're putting together a few different ideas for a startup. I can also start a conversation in the context of this document, which is very, very powerful, and I can give them some positive feedback and say, great work to Marsha and Terry. Remember to do that, you always want to use the app mention. And again, my students can then also respond in context. And you can see you can also then do reactions for student messages, as well as also if you ever do make a typo, just by clicking on the 3-dot ellipsis, we can see here a whole host of options to be able to then view the conversation. I can also edit my messages, as well as also translate and then use the Immersive Reader. Now the Immersive Reader is incredibly powerful because what it allows me to do is then also view this in my own way that helps me depending on my visual requirements. The Immersive Reader then has a guide which allows me to be guided through if you ever need to change the text sizing or even have it read aloud to you. And where this is very powerful is you'll see then if you want to have the text read back to you, or if you need to have the text with different colored backgrounds, depending on your learning requirements, Teams is then able to then adapt any of those text conversation messages to be able to then allow students to be able to view it in their own required visual preference. And we can even then do things like translation, which is particularly powerful. So say going from English to, let's say, German. And we can even translate the entire document itself. Very, very powerful in terms of creating a more inclusive learning experience for our students. Heading back to posts, you can now see all of those conversations occur within the context of the channel itself. So the message that I sent to the students, their responses, again, all of the conversations are in context of, for example, the previous online meeting that we had, and this gives us a rich collaborative space that we can work together in context on documents themselves. I focused a lot today on how you can use Microsoft Teams for online meetings with your students. Where I'd like to give a quick insight as to what Teams can look like when you really take advantage of all of the capabilities to make an online hub for your class where you can communicate and collaborate together across experiences. What I mean by that is, let me take you and switch across to this class team here where I can show a quick example of the OneNote class notebook. OneNote is a fantastic tool where you can provide spaces for students to be able to ideate, write their own notes in private, to be able to share worksheets with them and save time and paper while you can then distribute worksheets and have them work collaboratively together. An assignment service, which is then incredibly powerful with the ability for me to be able to then both create assignments as well as also quizzes that my students can then complete, and also saves me time if I choose to have them be automatically graded. You can see here in this assignment that I've created, I can see all of my students, I can turn in their work and have it returned to them, giving them grades, giving them feedback. I can edit the assignment and see here the instructions that was given, adding in rich documents, and also providing meaningful feedback using rubric grading. We also then have plagiarism integrations with Urkund and Turnitin. And when I head across to the gradebook, I can see a holistic view of my students, looking across then all of the assignments within my class itself. I also have the ability for rich analytics and in-depth insights that I can action, where I can see here as part of that conversation activity, I can see all of the students and how they've been engaging across the conversations in the different channels of my class team. When we start to see along the top where I have things like Homebase, this is taking advantage of all of those extra tabs, the apps that you can integrate. This is an example now of a rich site that's been created where I can have more learning content. I can have rich experiences where I can see slideshows embedded, videos embedded, all in the context still of this one team, even a countdown to the science fair as part of this site itself. This is really where Teams comes to life, is when you start to take advantage of the online meetings in combination with all of the different apps and integrations that Teams provides to become a powerful platform for learning. Heading back over to Teams, the class team you saw was then using the class notebook, the assignment service, but also the integrations that are available from the App Store within Teams. If I head over to my week 3 to give you a quick example, by clicking on the Add tab, that allows me to add other app integrations. You'll see there are apps here from Microsoft, so OneNote, Microsoft Forms, which is great for doing quizzes and polls and feedback surveys, Excel, and others. A third-party app example is Poly. So not made by Microsoft, but what this provides is a great poll experience to get really quick bits of informal feedback from your students, and there's hundreds more integrations. I'm going to use Poly as a quick example of how we can get informal feedback from students. And again, always remember, just like your smartphone, some apps are free, some apps are paid. Make sure you consult the privacy policy before adding a third-party app to your team. I'm going to click Save and then have the Poly integration be added to my team. One thing that Poly does, which is very powerful, I can create then polls for my students. Those polls can then be anonymous, multiple choice, as well as also be scheduled in advance. One of my areas that I really like about what Poly can do is it has the ability to have a chatbot. So if I go @Poly, the chatbot means I can save time by typing out a question very quickly with a question mark and a comma after each multiple choice option. And when I click Send, this now will create a poll for my students to be able to give me some feedback in real time. And I can also see a summary of the poll responses from the Poly tab. That's just one of the examples of the apps from the App Store. From the App Store, you can search by category. So for example, within education, we have then apps available from all sorts of different capabilities and different providers to integrate things like content like Wakelet. You can do plagiarism checking with Urkind, Flipgrid for capturing more student voice, and many, many more options. The last place I'm going to focus on today, though, is from the Help button, because this is where you can get a quick, short overview of all of the topics that we've covered as part of the Training tab. The Training tab then has built-in how-to guides right in Teams, where you can then see short 1 to 2 minute videos on all of the capabilities that we covered today and many more that we didn't get a chance to cover. To wrap up for today, though, that's where I'm going to head back to the slide. We have some next step resources to help you get started. Of course, the first place to begin is using Teams from the EDU Start URL that you see there. We have then more webinars that are available for free on demand. And lastly, the Teams Scenario Library allows you to see real scenario examples made by educators to share their professional practice. My name's Dominic Williamson, and I want to thank everyone for their time as part of the webinar today. If you're watching live, please stay to join for just a few follow-up questions, and thank you so much for joining this session.